Hello and welcome to the Wednesday, April 24th edition of the Cluster API Office Hours, a subproject of SIG Cluster Lifecycle. We have a relatively light agenda today, so if you have any topics that you want to cover, please go ahead and add them to the agenda, and also make sure that you add yourself to the attending list in the agenda as well. And I'm going to go ahead and paste that link in the chat for people who are following along live. The first topic on our agenda today is I wanted to give an update about the contributor t-shirts that I brought up a few weeks ago. We do have those getting printed out. If you were able to get your name on the list and you will be in Barcelona, you will be able to pick them up from the VMware booth at Barcelona. Otherwise, if you have already gotten your name on the list and you give me your address, it will be sent out directly to you as well. Apologies for folks who weren't able to get on the list in time. We had a deadline for getting the printing done. But I will go ahead and create a PR today for the Cluster API repo to share the designs. If you want to go ahead and get them printed up yourself, you're more than welcome to do so. I've been kind of delaying on that a little bit because I've been waiting for the CNCF to update it to their artwork repo, and that just hasn't happened yet. So I'll go ahead and get them added to the Cluster API repo. All right. Next item on the agenda, I'm going to jump around a little bit to save the workstream updates for last. So it's going to be Vince, your use cases document PR.
Yes, so the PR I think was open last week. I addressed most of the comments, if not all of them, this morning. Just as like a reminder, this document is meant to be as a staging area. It's not like all the use cases that like we possibly will have. It's meant to be just like as a reference for the KEPs that are going to be compiled within the work streams, and then kind of use cases like taken out and like matching requirements in each KEP. So after like we will merge, please feel free to add new use cases with like new PRs and or like fixes.
All right, thank you. Does anybody have any other topics before we start the workstream updates? All right, let's get into those then. All right, Vince with the, oh wait, no, Chuck with the extension.
Let me go last, hold on.
Yep, all right. All right, skipping over, Vince, data model.
Yes, data model has met already twice in the last 2 weeks. We have switched like fully asynchronous right now. The proposal document is where like we're kind of like pushing forward. As a reminder, the data model goal is to produce a proposal that like will delineate, define, and set boundaries between types, the current one, and the new one that we want to introduce. It's meant to be as like kind of a point to just say, for example, for a newcomer to come and say, okay, like I know what each like type does and what are their responsibilities. We have modeled the use cases across all of them, but please feel free to add more use cases there as well. And afterwards, we will probably start like kind of modeling some YAML and try to get like a little bit into more implementation detail as we go forward. We also have been in touch with API reviewers from Kubernetes Upstream. So the proposal will be reviewed so that we can get kind of like on the same page and get more eyes on it from like a newcomer perspective.
All right. All right, control plane lifecycle management. Is Hardik on?
Yes. So we had a kickoff meeting on Thursday, and very immediately, naturally, we understood that this is a very broad topic, and then we discussed quite some items which could be in scope, out scope. So for details, maybe you can check the document, with the minutes document. But from the high level, first of all, we discussed that the very basic question that how to deploy, or I would say where to deploy the control plane. That was still an open question, that because looking at the use case document, also we had other approaches proposed. So then we basically narrowed down to 3 approaches which we want to investigate and decide which could be, or if all of them could be good enough to have in cluster API. So the approaches were, the first approach is what we are doing right now, where we have dedicated machines as masters and we host the control planes there. Then one approach came out as we could have a management cluster which can host the control plane of the workload clusters. And the third approach that we want to investigate is that how to use the managed services in the cluster APIs. So there could also be managed services, like if you want to flawlessly create the clusters with the GKEs, control plane, or AKS, and so on. So we also wanted to check that possibility, that how does that use case looks like, and till what depth we can go. And with that, we are planning to create a design doc for all the 3 approaches. And I was hoping to have something probably next week, where we can give a right kind of trade-offs on all the different 3 approaches and decide that which approach makes sense, or whether we were also very positive that probably we could also create a gate in a way that all 3 of them could be satisfied in a ways. Then we also discussed how to auto scale, how to dynamically auto scale the control plane components, so as it's clear that probably day one of creating the or deploying the control plane is always easier, but maintaining the control plane when more and more workloads comes in, it becomes harder. Then we decided that probably we'll check this use case as well as part of the design talk that we will prepare. So that was more or less it. Probably next week we'll have one more follow-up meeting on the workstream. I'll keep it updated in discussions. Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Hardik. Node lifecycle management. Is Tim here?
Yeah. So we basically tried to enumerate what was be in scope and out of scope. We took a step back and then we focused on behaviors of what it means for the lifecycle of the node. And I think what was the prominent theme I kept on trying to reiterate, and as well as get feedback on too, was that immutability. So I think for the most part we have the model in place of what constitutes the lifecycle for a node, and what we need to do this week is determine which componentry and what things are in scope and what things are explicitly out of scope. We have an initial framing there, but we'll have the conversation this Friday, and then from there we'll start to define what behavior we want from those individual specs as we create them.
All right, thank you, Tim. All right, back to you, Chuck, for the extension mechanism.
Cool, yeah. We've been having a little bit of discussion on the document that I added to the meeting notes, and anybody that wants to chime in there can chime in there. We've been outlining really the pros and cons of the various options we discussed in our initial kickoff meeting. There's still some work to be filled out in there. If people are interested in the gRPC idea, that doesn't really have much information filled out, but you can see what we've got so far. So please feel free to participate there.
I think I had one proposal doc for the gRPC. Maybe I'll share with you.
Oh yeah, actually, could you send that to me? I forgot to copy that.
Yes, sure.
Thanks.
Yep.
All right. And oh wait, so I see another item on the agenda now for management of. I can't read it because it's popped over, but is that you, Hardik?
Yes. So last meeting I could not attend, but then I had requested Vince to circulate the proposal document, and I think we have quite some time, so maybe I can brief a little bit on it. So even the node lifecycle work stream, we could not find a spot, but anyway, so there is also an open issue in the repository, and the idea here was that at the moment, if if we want to maintain the taints, labels, annotations kind of information on the node objects, then they are not really persistent. So it does happen that because we want to probably in future automatically repair the machines or dynamically scale up or scale down, then it's very much probable that if user has really applied certain kind of taints on the node objects, then they will be lost. And there was an issue tracking on it, and I had self-assigned it. I wanted to work on it, so I created a proposal doc on that, and maybe I can take this chance and describe a little bit that what's the overall idea, and if there are any comments or suggestions. So there was also a nice discussion, and the bottom line for the discussion was that we should try to be as less disruptive as possible. And so the idea was that we should try to be additive and not be authoritative in such approach. Right? So if you read the proposal doc, what I have tried to do is that basically we become additive in a way that when you create the, let's take an example for the taints. When you create a taint, we propagate it till the node objects as it is, as it should be. All respective controllers from the machine deployment or the machine set controller maintains same taint across all of the node objects which belongs to that machine set. And while creating it, the flow is pretty simple. While updating, also the flow is pretty simple. If user goes in and updates something from the machine sets, labels or annotations or taints, we can quickly update. But then there was a trick in deleting such information. So we realized that if user has, let's say, and also to add that if user wants to add the custom labels, annotations, and taints on the node objects, then probably we should not mess with it. So it's very much possible that certain taints are coming from the machine controller, but there are also taints which user has directly applied to the node object and might not really be willing to be managed by the higher level controllers like machine controller and so on. So then the deletion flow become a little bit tricky, where if in the past user puts, let's say, taint x equals to y with certain effect, and if for reason the user decides to delete that taint from the machine set, then there is edge case where if the controller restarts or controller loses the state, then there is not really a good way for us to decide that which taint was really created by the user and how to go ahead and delete that specific taint or label or annotation from the node object. So that's where I also felt that we may end up becoming a little bit authoritative on it. So with that, we thought maybe it might be a good idea that we never really go ahead and delete such important information, because some real workload might actually be running there.
I want to stop here for a second, Hardik. Like, you're going way into implementation detail, and the question I have is, we only specified taints originally as the initial bootstrapping element that is required to originally quarantine a machine on entry, right? We've never specified the notion of annotations or labels explicitly, because you can do it as a post-process step independently. So the question I'm trying to understand here is, you went from zero to implementation without the user story of why we would go through and explicitly take on the state space of labels and annotations, because then you have to control that and monitor it and do everything else that is required from a spec and status perspective. So what are you trying to accomplish here that you couldn't accomplish externally?
Yes, so this actually, the user story actually came quite some time back on the discussions here. I could not actually figure out the discussions, but the idea was more or less that if such information is there on the node object, then somehow we should maintain it. Now, as you mentioned, probably it should be perfectly fine that probably a taint is something that we create only at the time of the creation, and probably labels and annotations could be something that user might want to add later via controllers and expect that it gets propagated and maintained on the node objects. I'm not sure though, but the main use case was that we somehow want to maintain such information on the node object. Now, according to proposal,
that's not a use case though. Like, I need a user story. Like, we need to do this for reason X. Like, just because we have it there or have the capabilities, that's not necessarily a user story or use case scenario. The user story and use case scenario is that it fulfills a need for an operator that we couldn't fulfill otherwise with the current data model. So that's what I want to understand. Like, if you have a concrete use case or user story, that's what I'm looking for.
So maybe I'll draft the use case in the same document again, but from the very high level, it seems that it is more about for managing the workload for the user. So what this information is required for. So for example, at least we are already seeing the requirements where user wants to say that with the XYZ set of machines, this XYZ workload should not be ever scheduled on this set of machines ever. And how to accomplish this now? So for now, user has to go ahead and taint the nodes on their own manually, but then it does happen that because of scaling up or scaling down, at some point those labels, those taints would probably be lost. So now user is saying that, do you have any way of accomplishing this via the machine controllers which can maintain such information on the node objects?
Taint makes perfect sense. Like I can totally get behind taint for initial joining and scale up and scale down, right? That already exists in other tooling. It's the labels and annotations that I still don't understand the user story, because the initial taint could go through its own process for entry, right? It's a conflating idea, and it's the reason why it was not put in other tools. So I want to make sure that we're explicit about understanding what is the explicit user story we are trying to accomplish when expanding the scope of this behavior, because with every capability comes responsibility. And do we want that responsibility?
So
yeah.
One thing that I want to point out is that we do have a template now for proposals, so we should probably follow that, which also includes use cases. So the proposal would have been much more complete if we would have used the template instead of the Google Doc. So
so I think it's interesting that this gets at like one of our core questions, which is how do we choose which node to delete? And I think it would be awesome if the proposal kind of encompassed the whole concept.
Yes, that's true. So yes, I guess there was a template. I just made it little earlier, some time back, and then missed on the template. Maybe I will migrate this on the template, but before that, maybe it's a good idea to actually discuss the user stories. So for the taints, I'll also try to draft the user story. So for taints, it seems it makes sense. For labels, it could be more about the affinities and so on, but I would say rather draft it first so that everyone can comment on it and then we can discuss.
Yeah, I think that will help the discussion a lot. Otherwise, I think we'll just bike shed here in perpetuity, because if we have the concrete user stories and use cases, that gives us something to rally around implementation details, which could be A or B.
Yeah, sure. Makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to help with that proposal. I think we do have a similar use case. I mean, in EKS control, we've implemented a feature for user to set taints and labels for a group of nodes. When they create a node group, they can set labels and taints for that group, and those are passed in as kubelet flags. And obviously, they are not reconciliated, and we don't actually mutate node groups as such. So there's just an initial setting there. Obviously, after that, user may change things, but it appears to be important to be able to set taints on the initial boot of the node before it joins, so that like let's say node may have potential privileged access to a certain network or cloud provider APIs, and if that is the case, you want to prevent any workloads, just like whatever workloads, to start on that node, except for the ones that tolerate particular taint, and have a node selector as well. So having that, having both of those features seems to make sense just logically. Obviously, it's only taints that are strictly required to be specified on first boot, and on first boot of every node that gets added to that particular group or machine set, I suppose. Mm-hmm. So I mean,
there are multiple ways to. I mean, the taints one is well established, right? Like that's been talked about at length, ad nauseum upstream. So I totally get that. The labels was considered controversial, so it was explicitly not in scope, and a person could automatically, if they wanted to, they could apply default labels by having the image creation mechanism, whatever that may be, auto inject those labels at that time, or they could do it as a secondary step during their initialization phase if they wanted to. So either way, like let's take this particular conversation offline and try to rally around concrete user stories.
Just to be clear, neither of those things are currently possible with machine set, and machine set doesn't use labels or anything for determining ownership. Or what does it do to determine ownership? So, like, I mean, because somebody raised the question of like deletion and draining and such, and how to determine which nodes do we want to delete or drain. Is that something that is not catered for at the moment?
Ownership, in a sense, machine set, I guess, has to go via the label selectors, right? Which is selectors at a different level, that which machines has actually the labels which are satisfying, and based on that selectors, it decides these are the set of machines which should be under that one particular machine set, and then the owner references on the machine points back to the machine set accordingly.
Right, but the question is, like, if we wanted to taint a specific node in the machine set as like try not to delete this node, I don't think we have that implemented right now.
Okay, sorry, I got it wrong. Yeah, that I don't think how do you want to achieve this. The idea here was more to treat all the machines under the machine set as the same, and all of them should have the same information. Yeah, having that kind of feature, we should again think whether it's needed and how.
All right. Any other topics? Nope. All right. Then let's call it for the day. Everybody have a great day. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.